Hello and welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets this evening?
We have no regrets this evening.
Thank you. Councilor, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I see none. I wonder if two of you would like to move us into Committee of the Whole. Councilor Duddick and Councilor Lischineth, thank you. Any objection? There being no objection, Madam Clerk, the motion carries and we are resolved into Committee of the Whole. Council, we have numerous consent items on the agenda before we get to our public meeting items. Councilor Chisholm, are you moving the public consent items and the confidential one? Thank you. Is there and we don't need a second because now we're in Committee of the Whole. Is there any objection to the consent items? Madam Clerk, there's none and they are adopted. That brings us in quick order to our first public hearing item. And if there's anyone watching the live stream of this meeting on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095 and we'll connect you to the meeting. You'll be called upon to speak following the registered delegations. This is the public hearing, public meeting and recommendation report for the draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment for 2352 8th Line and 2375 Woodridge Way. And we have a presentation from Kate Cockburn, who is our planner on this file. Kate, welcome. Council and the public look forward to your information.
Thank you, Mayor, members of Council. Good evening. I'm happy to be here this evening to present public meeting application for a draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment. And the application has been submitted by Weston Consulting on behalf of their clients, 116730092 Canada Inc. As the Mayor mentioned, if there is anyone watching the live stream of this meeting this evening, you can watch it at oakville.ca. If you wish to speak to the item, you can call in at 905-815-6095 to be connected to the meeting, and you'll be called upon at the appropriate time. The proposal relates to 6 new lots for detached dwellings, and the report can be found on the agenda tonight on page 57. This application has been presented to Council previously, and a public meeting was held on November 2nd, 2020. Due to a technical irregularity with the notice, the new public meeting is required. However, given that Council and public have provided their concerns respecting this application at a previous public meeting, staff have evaluated tonight's agenda item as appropriate for a combined public meeting and recommendation report for this evening. So a recommendation will be requested of Council tonight. Slide, please. The subject lands is located on the west side of 8th Line, south of Ravine View Way. And the applicant also proposes to obtain town-owned lands, which are located on the east side of Woodridge Way, south of Ravine View Way, as you can see on that slide. The property contains a detached dwelling fronting onto 8th Line, which would be demolished to facilitate the proposed development. In 1998, the lands surrounding the subject site were developed as part of a plan of subdivision. The town-owned lands, which are known as Block 117 of that development, were conveyed to the town. The subdivision agreement on title for the development provides that that block is expected to be redeveloped with abutting lands. Slide, please. The applicant is proposing 6 new residential lots for detached dwellings, 3 with frontage onto 8th Line and 3 with frontage onto Woodridge Way. Should the applicant obtain the town lands, they would be incorporated as part of this development. And the applicant requires a draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment to facilitate this proposal. Slide, please. As a way of background, as mentioned, the statutory public meeting had been held November 2nd, 2020, and no members of the public were present. However, written submissions were received by 7 members of the public. To date, no new public comments have been received on this application. Staff presented various matters for consideration, which included consistency with the provincial policy statement and conformity with the growth plan, as well as conformity with the regional official plan, conformity with the livable Oakville plan, including the intensification policies included in section 11.18 and 11.19. as well as compliance with the livable by design guidelines, Part A and Part C, which would speak to scale, massing, and landscaping of the proposed development. Preservation for the treatment for trees on the property, compatibility with the proposed development and the surrounding neighborhood context, the scale, massing, and setback of the dwellings relative to the existing adjacent dwellings, decommissioning of an existing well, disposition of the town-owned lands, and impacts on street parking and traffic conditions. All of these matters have been addressed to staff satisfaction, and the details have been included in the staff report. In addition to these items, Council raised the following additional matters, which have now been addressed in detail in the staff report, dated February 23rd, 2021. These include a review of the appropriateness of privacy issues with respect to the side windows, review of appropriateness of the shape of the most northerly lot on Woodridge Way, review of the town sidewalk design, and the appropriateness of the 3 entrances on Woodridge Way. Slide, please. To touch on these particular items, with respect to privacy, the applicant submitted an urban design brief with their application, which identifies how the proposed development is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood in terms of massing, scale, hard surface area, and landscaping. Lot 1, which is the northwest property which fronts onto Woodridge Way, abuts the rear yards of dwellings which front onto Ravine View Way. To ensure that the proposed dwelling does not present any negative privacy or overlook impacts, staff will require the submission of a scoped site plan application prior to the issuance of a building permit. This will be a condition of the draft plan approval and will allow staff to ensure that the window placement is done in a sensitive manner as it relates to the abutting properties. The site plan is intended to look at the elevation of the drawing specifically, while the subdivision process will review the engineering matters for the development. Slide, please. With respect to the lot fabric and the shape of the lots, the applicant submitted a study of the frontages and lot areas in the surrounding neighborhood. In review of the applicant's frontage study, it's staff's opinion that the proposed lots will support a dwelling that is similar in mass and scale to the dwellings in the immediate vicinity of the site. And it will provide the required setbacks, the required parking, and landscape areas consistent with what's found in the neighborhood. Additionally, in consideration of the greater neighborhood context, the variety of lot frontages and lot areas would further demonstrate the compatibility of the proposed dwellings with that surrounding neighborhood. As such, it's staff's opinion that the frontage study adequately demonstrates that the proposed lots maintain a character of the neighborhood and that the lotting pattern and dwelling design are compatible with that surrounding neighborhood. Slide, please. With respect to the sidewalk and entrances, the subject lands are currently considered a holdout parcel from the surrounding developed area. The sidewalk that is adjacent to that dwelling is currently an asphalt sidewalk. As a condition of draft approval, a new concrete sidewalk would be constructed by the applicant to current town standards and would be required to align with the existing sidewalk to the north and to the south. In addition, staff will require a road widening of approximately 3 meters along 8th line, which would include that existing asphalt sidewalk, to be reinstated as part of the boulevard. And new street trees will be planted consistent with the current boulevard condition to the north and south of 8th line. These works will be carried out by the developer and required as a condition of draft approval. Transportation staff have also evaluated the proposed development with respect to traffic, parking, and access. And they have advised that the proposed 6 lots present no negative impacts to the existing on-street parking conditions or the transportation network, and there are no conflicts with any existing driveways. Staff note that there are currently no on-street parking permissions on 8th line or on the east side of Woodridge Way, which immediately abut the subject lands. These are indicated by signage in the right-of-way. The driveways will be configured in a similar pattern to the existing driveways and present no conflicts. Slide, please. With respect to the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, the applicant's lands are currently zoned RL5 Special Provision 1. The Special Provision 1 has been applied to multiple properties within the town where redevelopment potential is an option, particularly where lands are not included in plans of subdivision. The Special Provision 1 prevents the owner from redeveloping the lands for residential uses without an application to the town. This allows the town to consider the appropriateness of that development. The town-owned lands are zoned RL8, which is consistent with the lands to the north and west that were previously included as part of the subdivision that surrounds the property. The applicant proposes to maintain the RL5 zone with a modification to reflect a revised minimum frontage. The new lots will have a frontage that ranges from 11.4 meters to 12.2 meters, whereas the minimum requirement for the RL5 is 15 meters. The zoning bylaw presented this evening does provide for a modification for a special provision to recognize 11.4 meters as the minimum frontage. Slide, please. As discussed, a previous public meeting was held and 7 public comments had been received, all of which opposed the proposal at the time. The public comments highlighted lot width, removal of existing well, house size, trees, privacy, town-owned lands, and development timelines as concerns with the proposed development. It's staff's opinion that these issues raised by the residents have been adequately addressed in the staff report and can be mitigated through the applicable draft plan conditions. No new public submissions have been made to date. Slide, please. This evening, staff present the following recommendations, items 1 through 8. The recommendation can be found on the staff report pages 57 and 58 of tonight's agenda. The next 2 slides highlight what the recommendation is. I may refrain from reading every single one of them, and I trust that council has reviewed the recommendations, items 1 through 8, which request approval of the proposed rezoning, as well as acceptance of the draft plan of subdivision, where the director of planning be authorized the authority to approve the draft plan of subdivision that has been submitted, subject to the conditions contained in Appendix A and Appendix B of the staff report, and acknowledge that a subdivision agreement will be prepared. Next slide, please. Staff would also like to highlight that with respect to this proposal, recommendation 7 and 8 would reflect that staff, Realty Services staff be delegated the authority to dispose of Block 117 in accordance with our current policies and on terms satisfactory to the town solicitor and CAO, and enter into a sale agreement as required to execute the transaction. In conclusion, I put forth these recommendations for council's consideration, and I'm here to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Council, do you have any questions for Kate? Councillor Adams, did I see your hand? You have the floor.
Thanks so much. I just have one question of clarification. I already spoke with Gabe Charles earlier today about another matter. Could you just clarify for me what the notice issue was that occurred?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Initially, when the application had been submitted, the notice was a reflection of the land holdings of the owner only. It had come to our attention that as part of the application, the town-owned parcel needed to be included as part of that circulation area, and it had been previously excluded. So we needed to do a recirculation of a public meeting notification in order to ensure that everybody within 120 meters of both parcels, the town-owned portion as well as the applicant's parcel, had been properly notified.
Perfect. So there were a few extra properties that would have been notified to the west of this property as a result.
Approximately 5.
Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
That's all the questions I have for you, Your Worship. I'm not sure if there's any members of the public that are online who wish to speak to the matter or not.
Thank you, Councillor. We have no we have no delegations. However, the planners for the applicant are available if anybody has questions for them. So in the absence of questions, I would entertain a motion. Councillor Adams, is that your intention here?
Yes, I will move the staff recommendation. If I could just say a couple of words about the application before we vote on it. So I appreciate the members of the public who did take part in the process earlier on. I appreciate the site plan element being required for the one lot on the north end of it. I think that will provide some comfort to members of the public who have had concerns around the privacy. I understand that that process can help deal with the issue of placement of windows specifically. And so that I think will help deal with some of the issues, particularly in terms of windows that might be on the second floor overlooking the backyards of some of the other properties. In addition, it could consider the issue of the placement of the lower windows in terms of where they are on the east-west spectrum of the home. The other issue I wanted to address briefly was the issue of the town-owned lands. I appreciate that some members of the public in the area view that as a parkette. However, that's never been the town's intent for those lands. It's not intended, never has been designated as a park or parkland. And I think to exclude them from the application might mean that we would end up with a worse design of the property in terms of a redevelopment, one that would be more problematic for the neighbors and create a pattern of lots that would cause greater troubles than the 6-lot pattern that is being proposed here tonight. And I think in combination with the application that was previously dealt with at the northeast corner of 8th line, I think the overall lot pattern in the neighborhood will be in essence completed by this application. And so I think we should end up with something that is relatively speaking compatible with the rest of the neighborhood. And for that reason, I support the recommendations of our staff.
Thank you, Councillor. Shall I put the vote? Are there any objections to the motion? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, the motion carries. Thank you, everybody. Now, the next item is a recommendation report and zoning bylaw amendment for St. Paul's United Church at 454 Rebecca Street. And if there's anyone watching the live stream of this meeting on oakville.ca who wishes to speak to this item, you can call 905-815-6095 and we'll connect you to the meeting. You'll be called upon to speak following the registered delegations. Council, we have no registered delegations. Exactly, the planner on behalf of the applicant is available for questions. Councillor Duddick, the chair recognizes you.
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to say I forgot to declare a conflict on this issue. I am a member of the congregation of St. Paul's United Church, and therefore I will not participate in either the discussion or the vote on the item.
Thank you, Councillor. Will you arrange with the clerk to file the appropriate declaration in writing? Thank you. Councillor Chisholm.
Your Worship, I'd like to move this recommendation on discussion item number 7. I think it's pretty straightforward. However, there might be some discussion, but I'd be happy to move it.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Okay. All right. I think the councillor's motion is in order. Is there any objection to the motion? There being no objection, I'll declare Councillor Chisholm's motion carried unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Council, I will note that we had written delegations all supporting this proposal. And that brings us to item 8, the discussion report. This is a fairly large file. The Bronte-Go Major Transit Station Area Study. And we have a presentation from Brad Sunderland, our planner, and we have a registered delegation from Emma West of Bousfields, and she is appearing on behalf of a landowner in the area. And she has a number of points that she's provided us in writing, and we'll look forward to discussing those with her. Mr. Sunderland, council is ready, and we are all ears, waiting for your presentation. All right, the clerk tells us that Mr. Sunderland is talking, but we're not getting anything from him, so we're suspecting that he's still muted. And I'm announcing that in case he hears it and can change his condition.
Hello,
Hello,
can you hear me?
we can hear you much better now.
Apologies for that.
It's all right.
Yeah, here I am. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. So I am happy to bring forward the Bronte-Go Major Transit Station Area Study at tonight's meeting. It does culminate 2 years of work that both town staff and the town's retained consultant team led by Sejeki Planning have been undertaking. I'm going to be doing the introductory portion of the presentation, and I'm going to be handing it over to David Sejeki to do the presentation on the area-specific plan. So the discussion report for the Bronte-Go Major Transit Station Area is item 8 on tonight's agenda and can be found on page 131 of the agenda package. So the purpose of tonight's discussion meeting is to learn about the area-specific plan, ask questions of clarification, and if we can answer them tonight, we will do so, and if not, we will ensure to take note and for responses in future reports to council. Here are delegations from people who have pre-registered to speak, and Emma is going to do that, and identify additional planning matters to be considered to inform the development of a town-initiated official plan amendment. So comments received following tonight's meeting will continue to be welcomed from the public up to and including part of a future statutory public meeting where staff will present a draft official plan amendment as part of the statutory meeting process under the Planning Act. Next slide, please. So very briefly, what is a major transit station area and why a study? So a major transit station area, which is commonly referred to as an MTSA for short, is the area around a higher order transit station, such as the Bronte-Go station. An MTSA generally includes the lands within 500 to 800 meter radius of the transit station, representing about a 10-minute walk. And MTSAs are identified because they are key locations which integrate the town-wide transportation system, facilitate easy access to transit and transit connections, and provide a focus for transit supportive development and intensification. So we're doing this study in response to the province's growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which identifies major transit station areas and provides policies that local official plans must conform to. This requires planning for major transit station areas, including planning for a minimum density target of residents and jobs, and the creation of complete transit supportive communities. Next slide, please. So as part of the town's ongoing official plan review, which is working towards conforming with the province's growth plan, council adopted official plan amendment 15, which is a town-wide urban structure back in September of 2017. The town-wide urban structure provides for the long-term protection of the town's natural heritage, public open space, and cultural heritage resources, maintains the character of residential areas, and is the foundation that provides the foundation and the overall context for where and how the town will grow, and directs growth to identified nodes and corridors. And within council's approved urban structure, the Bronte-Go station is identified as a major transit station area, which needs to be studied in order to achieve the objectives set out by the province's growth plan and the town's approved urban structure. Next slide, please. So the Bronte-Go MTSA study was initiated at the Livable Oakville Council Subcommittee in June of 2018. At the meeting, key objectives were identified, and staff noted that consultants would be retained to work with the town to prepare the area-specific plan. And in December of 2018, Sejeki Planning was retained by the town to complete the work required to develop the area-specific plan. The study was broken into 5 phases. In phase 1, staff held a public launch, a project launch meeting with town departments and agency staff and led the consultant team on a walking tour. A public engagement strategy was developed. And on March 21st, 2019, the project's first public engagement workshop was held to solicit input from the public and agency staff to assist in developing ideas for a vision statement and guiding principles, as well as to better understand the challenges and opportunities within the study area. public engagement session was followed by an online survey, which was available for several weeks on the town's website to solicit input on what is working and what could be improved within the area. Phase 2 included the early development of draft land use scenarios, and the scenarios were first presented at a technical advisory committee meeting containing members from the consultant team, Metrolinx, Halton Region, school boards, Conservation Halton, and town staff from numerous departments, where preliminary comments were collected and considered. Within Phase 3, the consultant team continued to work on the supporting technical studies required to evaluate and support a new plan for the area. And in the summer of 2019, based on information available, 2 draft land use options were prepared for consideration. These 2 draft land use options were presented to the Livable Oakville Council Subcommittee in October of 2019 for feedback, and this was followed by a public engagement workshop held in November of 2019. The public engagement session had participants review the 2 draft options and identify opportunities and constraints of each. The 2 options were also provided in an online survey to solicit public input towards the development of a preferred plan. Phase 4 involved developing the preferred area-specific plan. This phase took somewhat longer than anticipated, given the required response to COVID-19. However, the project team persevered, and in summer of 2020, a second virtual technical advisory committee meeting was held to review and assess final draft options of numerous technical studies, as well as the draft preferred area-specific plan. And based on input from the technical advisory committee, further work was undertaken by the consulting team to finalize the technical studies and make changes to the area-specific plan in response to study findings. All input received throughout the study process from the public and town council was also considered as part of developing a preferred plan. We're now entering Phase 5 of the study, which includes the presentation of the final area-specific plan, which is indicated with the star symbol. This is the last step of the study process prior to the preparation of a draft official plan amendment and entering into the statutory public process required by the Planning Act. The plan being presented this evening represents the preferred plan for the Bronte-Go MTSA and the general completion of the area-specific plan. Next slide, please. And before I pass the presentation over to David to present the area-specific plan, I just wanted to highlight that tonight's meeting is a discussion item, and it does provide an opportunity to both learn about the plan and provide preliminary feedback. Comments will continue to be welcomed from the public following this meeting, up to and including as part of the statutory public meeting. The statutory public meeting is anticipated in the spring of 2021, which will present a draft official plan amendment to council and will be another opportunity to provide comments on the policies prepared and presented at that time. A recommendation meeting is anticipated to be held by the end of the year, where council will be asked to adopt the proposed official plan amendment. And given that this study is being carried out as part of the town's official plan review, Halton Region is the final approval authority, and any adopted official plan amendment by town council will be forwarded to Halton Region for final approval. And final approval by the region will be coordinated with Halton Region's ongoing municipal comprehensive review or their official plan review. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to David and to present the area-specific plan. Next slide, please.
Great, thank you very much, Brad, and good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Please let me know if anyone is unable to hear me. As Brad mentioned, the area-specific plan provides a framework and recommendations to help the town develop an official plan amendment for the Bronte-Go major transit station area. Next slide, please. 5 key study objectives were developed for this study, and these include working with the region to delineate the major transit station area boundary for the Bronte-Go MTSA, recommending land uses, building heights, and densities to guide development within the MTSA, updating the transportation network with a greater emphasis on active transportation, while still ensuring that the functionality of the area continues to work from a vehicle transportation perspective, identifying required municipal infrastructure improvements, and providing opportunities for urban design and public realm improvements. Next slide, please. So this slide identifies the boundary for the MTSA. The outline in red identifies the specific study area boundary, while the two black dashed circles represent 500 meter and 800 meter radii. The red circle right in the middle of the area identifies the location of the Bronte GO station. The station anchors the MTSA. It is one of two regional rail transit stations in South Oakville. It's located along the Lakeshore West Corridor. And in addition to GO rail service, the station provides Oakville transit bus connections and cycling facilities. The study area in red is bound by the QEW to the north, established residential neighborhoods to the south, 14 Mile Creek to the east, so the right-hand side of the image, and larger industrial properties and parcels to the west. Next slide, please. This slide identifies some images of existing conditions throughout the MTSA. Today, the area is largely industrial. Existing uses include heavy shipping and transportation functions, auto and boat repair operations, heavy and light manufacturing, warehousing operations, and offices. The southeastern portion of the study area near Third Line and Spears Road includes a cluster of car dealerships, retail uses, a rental hall, and gas stations. And as previously mentioned, just south of the study area is a stable low-rise residential neighborhood and Seabrook Park. Within the MTSA itself, there are no existing parks. The largest properties are located adjacent to the GO station between Wycroft Road and Spears Road, and this reflects their heavy industrial uses, existing heavy industrial uses, and historic engagement with the railway. Next slide, please. A vision and 12 guiding principles for the MTSA were developed with the public. The vision for the MTSA is that the Bronte GO MTSA will be a complete community. It will maintain a focus on employment while introducing residential uses through mid-rise mixed-use development. Over time, the Bronte GO MTSA will transition into a vibrant, pedestrian-friendly hub, serving as both an origin and destination for jobs and residents. The immediate GO station area will serve as the heart of this complete community, with Spears Road as its spine. The guiding principles themselves are based on the themes of seamless mobility, placemaking, and successful implementation. 5 principles were developed for seamless mobility, and important amongst those are the ideas to balance the existing needs for commercial vehicles while accommodating plans to create a more pedestrian-friendly community, developing an active transportation network adjacent to the rail corridor, and improving north-south connections across the rail corridor for both vehicles and pedestrians. Next slide, please. With respect to placemaking, key guiding principles were developed that include incorporating active frontages into new development, providing sensitive transitions to the stable residential neighborhoods to the south, and setting the stage to create an inviting and pedestrian-friendly public realm through the development of parks, open spaces, and improved wayfinding and signage. Next slide, please. In terms of a successful implementation, so the third theme, it is important to ensure that we develop a framework that adopts a phased approach to development, one which balances the needs of existing users, but has future adaptability in mind as more office and residential uses are introduced into the MTSA. Next slide, please. These guiding principles were made more context specific through the development of 7 big moves or structuring elements that provide on-the-ground direction for the area's development as a complete community. The first big move is to use the idea of neighborhood walking sheds as a tool to identify the distance that most people are willing to walk to a destination. The blue circle on this image identifies a 500 meter radius centered on the GO station. It is within this radius that we feel that there will be the biggest opportunity to encourage walkability to the GO station. It is also within this radius where we felt it best to prioritize a safe and convenient pedestrian-friendly environment with diverse uses and services. And I should mention as well too that this 500-meter radius was chosen for consistency with the Wycroft Road Environmental Assessments walking shed. Next, please. The next big move aligns with the idea of a neighborhood walking shed and directs the tallest buildings with the highest densities and intensity of uses at or near the GO station. Densities transition down away from the GO station and particularly towards the neighborhoods to the south. Next, please. The third big move is to develop a series of linear north-south, and east-west green trails and paths that can connect to key destinations and natural areas, as shown on this slide. They also provide an opportunity to provide a buffer between mixed use and employment areas. These green connections are also intended to connect urban squares, plazas, and privately owned public spaces. Next, please. Big move number 4 is the desire to improve north-south connectivity. Right now, north-south connectivity is largely constricted to along Third Line. So one of the key big moves that was identified is an extension of Westgate Road, which is shown by the blue dashed line to the left of the screen. And this is recommended to be done through a grade-separated crossing. Just as important, however, to this big move is the idea of introducing a fine-grained local street network, which is identified in this image by the gray dash lines. And this assists in breaking up existing large properties, providing a more permeable street network. Next, please. The fifth big move is to introduce mixed-use blocks while still focusing on employment uses. This diagram is largely conceptual. It's showing mixed uses to the left in the orange color and employment uses to the right, but don't pay too much attention to that at this stage. It was later informed by compatibility between employment functions and the desire to introduce sensitive uses, and was informed by our technical analysis. Next slide, please. With respect to big move number 6, gateways and landmarks, there are not a lot of items in the study area that jumped out as existing landmarks, but the desire here is to introduce a series of gateways and visual connections to help create a sense of place at critical intersections and to better guide residents and visitors toward the GO station. The sites located on this image include the highway ramp at Wycroft and Third Line, and key access points from Wycroft and Spears Road into the GO station. And those are identified here by the circles with the, it looks like I guess a horseshoe a little bit. It's supposed to be the Spirit Arch from St. Louis, but those circles are the locations of potential gateways. And gateways and landmarks can be defined via architecture, public art, wayfinding and signage, plazas, or privately open public spaces. Next slide, please. The final big move was to start to identify potential areas where active retail frontages can contribute to street animation and promote pedestrian safety. It isn't practical to include the entire MTSA as appropriate for active retail frontages, so we wanted to focus on a few key locations, and key to those locations are along Spears Road and near the GO station. Next slide, please. These big moves were later informed by a series of technical studies that led to the preferred land use framework. It's this framework that forms the basis for the area-specific plan recommendations. Those recommendations, which we'll walk through over the next few minutes, relate to development phasing, land uses, building heights, the street and road network, the pedestrian and cyclist network, open spaces, urban design in the public realm, community services and facilities, and environmental servicing. Next slide, please. The area-specific plan. So this slide shows the land uses broken out over 2 phases, phases 1 and 2. The area-specific plan proposes that Bronte-Go MTSA be developed over these 2 primary phases, and it is strongly influenced by air quality buffers that are required to separate residential development from industrial emissions. Phase 1, which is shown to the left of the screen, illustrates the land uses that constitute the first phase of development. The plan in phase one is based on the assumption that all major industrial facilities continue operating within the MTSA. It features employment uses that are identified in phase one in blue across most of the MTSA, while mixed use permissions identified by orange are located south of the rail corridor and confined to the western part of the study area. These are areas that are able to accommodate mixed use development based on existing conditions. The image to the right is phase two, and it represents the long-term land use plan for the MTSA. We'll get into more specifics around the actual uses shortly. But what it is based on is the assumption that over time, Procore and ROPAC will eventually relocate. There's no impetus for them to relocate, but in order for the residential uses to be introduced, that would be a requirement. The majority of lands in this option are designated mixed use, which form the urban core and urban center designations, while office employment is identified south of the QEW and west of Third Line, while business employment is permitted east of Third Line. Next slide, please. And this image, what it really does is it identifies a lot of the reasons behind why this plan is identified over two phases. The image in yellow illustrates, the yellow illustrates the air quality buffers and how they have a strong influence of the location of uses. Anywhere that is identified within yellow, residential or other sensitive uses are not permitted because of industrial air quality issues. And next slide, please. This slide focuses on the final land use plan. It shows office employment in light blue, and the office employment designation, as mentioned just recently, applies to blocks along the QEW and along the western side of Third Line. Permitted uses should align with the office employment designation in the livable Oakville plan and includes major offices, hotels, public halls, light industrial uses and training facilities, and commercial schools. Business employment is to east of Third Line, and it's the area identified in the darker hatched blue. And this designation permits land uses that are also consistent with the livable Oakville plan and includes offices and light industrial uses, hotels, public halls, training facilities, and commercial schools. While the rest of the area has the urban core and urban center land use designation, and these aim to provide an urban built form that features a mix of uses, contributes transit supportive densities, and supports the efficient use of municipal infrastructure and services. Urban core is at a higher density than the urban center designation, and it is located adjacent and near the GO station. And it includes the blocks fronting both sides of Wycroft Road and blocks fronting on the north side of Spears Road. Permitted uses here align with the urban core designation and include a range of retail and service commercial uses and residential uses. Urban center in the lighter pink or purple, lighter purple color applies to the blocks south of Spears Road and along the western portion of the MTSA. It has similar land use permissions to the urban core designation, but as I'll speak to shortly, the densities are highest within the urban core designation. Next slide, please. This slide identifies the recommended building heights within the study area. The tallest building heights are concentrated around the Bronte GO station. Throughout the entire study area, there are heights between 2 to 20 stories. In the darker orange color, those are properties that are within the urban core designation, and they have permissions between 5 to 20 stories in height. I guess the orange color permits building heights between 3 to 8 stories. It includes both employment uses as well as urban center designations. And then the lightest yellow permits heights between 2 to 4 stories. And one of the key reasons for that lower height is because of its proximity to the neighborhoods to the south, and really looking at how can we provide that sensitive transition towards the neighborhood to the south while keeping the highest densities within the area that is closest to the GO station. Next slide, please. And this image identifies the recommended road network for the area. New roads within the MTSA are intended to break up larger industrial blocks and strengthen transportation connections to existing roads. What you can see on the left-hand side of the screen is the extension of Westgate Road, which is grade separated from the crossing, either above or below the rail crossing. This will provide additional access between Wycroft Road and Spears Road. And you also see a network of new local streets that are identified by the light purple color that will divide large blocks and improve pedestrian, cyclist, and vehicle circulation. A few of the specific directions within the area specific plan are to have improvements to Wycroft Road between Bronte Road and Third Line to provide 2 travel lanes in each direction and a center turn lane. Improvements to Spears Road between Bronte and Third Line to also provide 2 travel lanes in each direction and a center turn lane. The widening of Bronte Road from 4 to 6 lanes, and extending Westgate Road again, either above or below the rail corridor. Next slide, please. And this slide shows the proposed active transportation network throughout the area. It includes a new cycling facility along the Westgate Road extension and a multi-use trail adjacent to the rail corridor. It also incorporates currently planned cycling facilities and planned linkages connecting to the major transit station area. Areas for potential active transportation linkages are identified along the southern boundary of the MTSA, and these are to provide improved connections from the existing residential neighborhoods to the south and the Bronte GO station. No specific area has been identified yet, but we see benefit if there is an opportunity to really be able to break those blocks off and provide direct connections to those neighborhoods rather than forcing residents to commute via Third Line. A few of the specific key directions include an east-west multi-use trail north of the rail corridor that would extend to 60 Mile Creek to the east and Bronte Creek to the west, an east-west multi-use trail south of the rail corridor that provides connectivity between Third Line and the proposed extension of Westgate Road. There's also a north-south multi-use trail that is a little bit west of Third Line that would extend from Spears Road to the south to the 14 Mile Creek trail to the north. Bike lanes should be provided along the proposed Westgate Road extension, as well as along Spears Road. And there are additional proposed bike lanes that would connect Wycroft Road and the proposed multi-use trail north of the rail corridor and between Spears Road and again that same multi-use trail south of the rail corridor. Next slide, please. And this image identifies it illustrates potential locations for new open spaces. So I should state too that the exact locations of any of these open spaces have not been determined, and that these would be determined through the development approvals process. We're not saying that any specific site has to be on this specific property. However, potential open spaces and linkages include multi-use off-street trails providing east to west and north-south connections throughout the MTSA and along the rail corridor, and connecting to the 14 Mile Creek Trail. A network of potential north-south open spaces accommodating passive uses with the intention to provide that buffer between employment and mixed-use areas, and also the opportunity to provide open spaces and transit plazas right near the Bronte GO station. Next slide, please. And this image, there's a lot going on in this image, so I won't go into details on all of them, but this is also illustrative. So there is not regulatory policy direction to this, but some of the key directions have already been discussed but they include the idea to emphasize the planned mixed-use function of Spears Road as a main street with ground floor commercial uses, providing an accessible park and open space network, including parks, parkettes, and squares, which can be comprised both of traditional parks, but also looking at introducing privately owned public spaces, establishing parts of the open space system that will connect with 14 Mile Creek, using those linear open spaces as an opportunity to buffer employment and mixed use residential areas, encouraging travel demand management practices, and that improved active transportation network. Primary frontages, which it's going to be a little bit hard to read on this image, but they're identified by the solid red lines, are areas where we would like to see active acreage uses, including commercial uses, and secondary frontages identified by the red dashed lines should be encouraged to be active acreage uses, but not necessarily retail uses. And then also another thing that we had mentioned before is the idea of including gateway locations that can be visually prominent to help direct people towards the GO station and create that sense of space. Next slide, please. And this speaks to some of the community services and facilities that over time, as the area develops, would start to be introduced to the MTSA. The image, again, similar to open spaces, does not indicate the exact locations of any community services and facilities, but it is based on the following recommendations and principles. And those include that childcare centers that are shown in this image by the light blue color can be located in residential towers and near employment areas to facilitate pickup and drop off of children. Schools, which are identified by the lighter purple color near Wycroft Road. These should be located away from existing employment areas to mitigate impacts on noise levels and air quality, as well as along green corridors to facilitate active transportation, the use of outdoor space. Social services should be located near or in employment areas and near public transit and active transportation networks. And community centers should be located near public transit to facilitate local and regional accessibility. Next slide, please. And this image is a demonstration plan of what the area could look like at full build out. This is looking at a 2015 time range. So you can see the predominantly mid-rise focus of the area. And that's for a number of reasons. So this represents 2051. Again, taller buildings are located near the GO station. And to help orient people, north is actually to the left of this image. That's where you see the QEW. And the GO station is where you see the large GO symbol. At full build out, it reflects about 18,500 jobs and just over 8,000 residents. This represents a net density of 240 people and jobs per hectare, which if you look at a net number is 180 people and jobs per hectare, which meets the minimum requirements for the MTSA of 150 people and jobs. And this is just one option of how it could be built out, but it offers a lot of opportunity, a lot of areas for growth, supported very well by regional express rail transit and investments in municipal infrastructure. And we will be excited to see this develop over time. And next slide, please. And this slide just identifies within the area specific plan, we've provided a number of implementation measures that can be utilized to see this area develop over time to meet the requirements. I'm happy to go into details on any of these measures if there are questions about them. But with the respect to time and my understanding that Brad is also going to speak to recommendations and next steps, I will say thank you, turn to the next slide and hand the presentation back to Brad. Thank you.
One more slide, please. It's just the recommendations from the staff report. So the recommendations to council is that council receive the report, this evening. That any comments from council and the public with respect to the Brony-Go major transit station area study and area-specific plan be received, and that staff move to develop a town-initiated official plan amendment substantially in accordance with the area-specific plan for the Brony-Go MTSA in consideration of comments received, and report back at a future statutory public meeting of Planning and Development Council, where there'll be another opportunity for input. So with that, that concludes the presentation. So if there's any comments or questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sunderland. Let me be the first to ask if this did you guys mean to imply that we wouldn't have bike lanes on all streets and we'd only have them where they were mentioned?
Through you, your worship, the active transportation schedule or plan, where they're shown is where we have anticipated to include them. So there is already plans in place to include bike lanes on Wycroft Road as well as Spears Road, and those are through previous environmental assessment studies that have been completed. And the addition of the active transportation network, be it the east-west connections and north-south connections that were in multi-use trails. And so not every street would be required to have a bike lane. Some of these streets would be more local roads in nature, so they wouldn't necessarily require one, but that is what the plan says. It's not to say that you can't have more bike lanes than what's shown on that map. It's just saying that's where we would want to see them.
All righty, well, we'll see if anybody else wants more bike lanes. Can I just also ask if any of your plans include for pedestrian safety barriers at all railroad crossings?
Through you, go ahead, David.
Through you, your worship. I mean, all crossings would be developed to all safety standards as identified by Metrolinx and CN Rail, and those would include safety barriers. And I will add to the last question as well that, I mean, all major roads within the study area would have bike lanes. As per Brad's comment, there are a number of local roads that have been identified, and you know, the specific infrastructure for those have not specifically been determined.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions. Council, Councilor O'Meara, it's your area. You're next.
Thank you, Worship. I just have a few questions. Do we know what sort of remediation or brownfields we're going to be looking at with a lot of this property in here? Are there any studies that were done, or is there a requirement to do these types of studies so that we know sort of what we're going to have to tackle in the future, or what the developers are going to have to tackle in the future?
Through you, your worship, to the councillor. So as part of the MTSA study, there was no specific technical work done to identify contamination issues, if there are any. However, we do know that there's likely to be some, given that this is industrial area and the presence of heavy industrial users is likely. As part of any site-specific development application that would be privately initiated, if they are going from, say, an industrial use and it's being redeveloped to a more sensitive land use, the region of Halton requires records of site condition be submitted, and potentially even environmental site assessments to determine the level of contamination, if any, and the remediation required. So as part of this study, we haven't identified the sites, but it is likely that there are some, given the nature of the uses.
Thank you. I'd say it's more than likely. I would guarantee there are many. Where I was going with that is I'm sure that will lead into some sort of impact on your phasing. So the desire to do anything in phase one that might have some long-term repercussions with remediation might impact a lot of that. So, but anyway, I'll set that aside for a minute. I have a question with and I apologize, it's escaping me. I believe it's the urban core, urban center. There were building heights. It was 2 to 4, 3 to 8, or 5 to 20. why is there such a discrepancy between 5 to 20? Why would it not be a little more apropos to what we're looking for there in terms of height, 15 to 20 or 10 to 15? What's with the discrepancy between either 5 stories or 20 stories?
Through you, your worship, to the councillor, it's much more refined than perhaps I made it clear during the presentation. So there are areas that permit 5 to 8 stories in heights. There are areas that permit 5 to 20 stories, but that's a very small area that is located just near the GO station. And the reason for the 5 is simply to set the minimum heights that can be permitted, but it is expected that within those blocks that I will emphasize are north of Spears Road, south of Wycroft Road, and in close proximity to the GO station, that the majority of those would be built to their likely their highest permissible densities. That is where we as a team felt it made sense to show the highest densities, but we wanted to include that minimum density that didn't drop below that, while keeping consistent with the vision that the majority of the area is looking at a mid-rise development. And we had to work quite closely with the transportation team to look at what are the densities that can still be supported with the transportation network as we transition to much more of a multimodal split between active transportation, transit, and private vehicle use.
Thank you for that. And it segued sort of right into my last question, and really the big sort of gorilla in the room I want to try and wrestle down here. It's the split between residential and sort of employment ratio here. We're seeing a lot right now, either sprawl or intensify, and that's what we're being told. We have designated growth nodes and our urban structure, and this is one of our urban structure. And to be honest, I'm actually in the place where I think residents are expecting intensification, to see a 30% residential split to 70% employment, when in our employment review, it said we have ample amount of employment lands up to 2041. Are we under intensifying this location? And again, you mentioned the transit, and as we've had these discussions numerous times, we can't support transit unless we have density and unless we have intensification along some of these major nodes and corridors. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that split, the 70-30 split, where that comes from, and why we aren't actually seeking to have more. This is the place where we want to build residential rather than sprawl more or in stable residential neighborhoods. I guess I'm interested in your comments on that.
Brad, did you want to try that first, or do you want me to take that? I'm happy to take it.
So I will give it a shot.
I'll join after, because I have a few.
Please
thoughts.
do. Yeah, it'd be great. Through you, your worship, to the councillor. The split is, as you mentioned, 70% jobs to 30% residents. And we've heard this comment where, what is the ratio? What is the appropriate ratio? And should we be adding more residential development rather than having as much employment? I think one of the things that David had talked about was just the land uses that were informing the transportation network, and those choices to ensure that as we transition from that purely employment area to a more mixed use area, that transportation network can be still function as it should. It is a growth node that from the vision statement on down, it was intended to maintain a focus on employment. So that was kind of one of our founding vision statements at the front end of the process. That said, with having to maintain some flexibility in the plan, these targets are, long-term 2051. We are going to have to, as we develop into the future, the employment market clearly is changing, and in the last year has changed significantly. That's why we do our 5-year reviews of our official plan to, you know, ground truth everything to make sure things are still realistic, and if they can happen. So there's always opportunities to continue to adjust. And I would say, just in terms of the employment, we do have to, you know, ensure that the land use permissions that we put in place provide the flexibility to respond to the market as it changes. So right now we're showing, obviously, there's, you know, 18,000 plus jobs in the area, and that's total at the 2051 marker. But we have to make sure that, you know, the land use policies that are put in place, again, flexibility and ensuring that they're resilient to be, you know, reasonable over the long term. So we have to make sure, even from a policy perspective and the growth plan, that there is new policies in there where, when lands are changing from employment land to uses that are non-employment, we have to provide guidance to ensure that there's a same or similar number of jobs maintained on those sites as they redevelop. And that's a direction from the growth plan. So it's also why you might see, you know, these individual properties, as they redevelop, they might not be able to redevelop fully as residential properties. They'll have to maintain some sort of employment component to them. In addition, you know, how employment might be calculated in the future. Right now, the region of Halton does their employment survey. They demonstrate, you know, how many jobs are within a particular area. Those job counts also include off-site workers if they're reporting to a specific location. So that also bumps up numbers quite a bit. Even though those workers aren't on site, they're still counted towards jobs that are attributed to that location. So what does that mean in future when we're looking at, you know, people working from home and that sort of thing? If there are residents in here, do those count as jobs if they're working? I think it is a dynamic situation with how employment is considered. And so that might be why some of these jobs are higher. But David, if you have anything to add onto that, please do.
Through you, Your Worship, to the councillor. I'll start off first that I agree completely with Brad that the land uses that are identified do permit a flexibility of uses. So what we have identified is targets that could build out, and those are based on a series of assumptions related to gross floor area per worker, and residential units. But those could change over time, and there's flexibility in the plan to permit that. I do want to identify that employment is a bigger driver of transit use than residential. That was another consideration that we took into effect. As per what you mentioned earlier, that there are challenges with these lands transitioning to mixed use areas, whether those are related to air quality concerns or related to what will be expected to be environmental remediation of some of these sites. And the final comment that I will make is, initially we had envisioned this area at a higher density, and we tested scenarios at much higher densities. But regardless of the very ambitious modal split targets that we assumed at those higher densities, we had transportation failure throughout the network. And some transportation failure, I personally consider as a land use planner a good thing, because it promotes walkability. But the types of transportation failure that we were seeing we were looking at options that were 50 to 100% higher densities than what we're looking at right now. And we brought it significantly down, which still meets all the growth plan targets, just because the transportation failure, if you go much higher than this, could present a real challenge.
Sorry, I thank you very much, David, for that, and Brad. I know it's not an easy one to tackle, and maybe this wouldn't be the ideal site along the GO line to propose this type of an area due to all the environmental concerns and that sort of thing. But thank you very much, and I look forward to the public meeting later in the spring. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Robertson is next. The three of you have reminded me of my father's favorite saying about being a weather forecaster. Forecasting is very hard especially about the future. Anyway, Councillor Robertson.
Hi, David. Thank you for the report. It was great. I am just more worried about connections, active transportation connections down to the existing south residents. And I know you mentioned it. I just wanted to be kind of highlighted that I think there's a lot of people that are south that just despise getting out to third line, won't ride a bike to get to the go because it's too dangerous. If there was any link from the west gate that you could even get through, no cars even, if it's just bicycles and pedestrians and an access through there, that would be awesome.
Through you, your worship, to the councillor. The first thing, just adding on the mayor's comments, what they always say about modeling is as soon as you model something, it's wrong. So the numbers will change, but they are our best educated targets that we've set. And Councillor Robertson, I completely agree. We've identified a number of areas where there could be potential pedestrian connections to the south. I think it would be very, very challenging to have a road connect through. We haven't identified a specific location because we know that is a longer process that would include engagement with the community as there are property impacts that would be associated with that.
For sure, and I understand that. I also have this sense that when we do a new community, we need to be cognizant of better ties to existing communities so they don't feel isolated and we don't become pockets that don't intermingle and have lots to do with each other. So I think that's probably one of my biggest worries in the whole thing, is it doesn't become such an isolated little community.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Very good point. Councillor Elgar, did I see your hand momentarily there? If so, you're next. Otherwise, it's Councillor Giddings.
Yes, you did see my hand. Thanks, Mayor Burton. A question, to put it in perspective, I realize you're looking now with a Ouija board 30 years out, but where you're saying there's going to be like 18,600 jobs and 8,200 residents. In 2021, in this area, what are the number of jobs and residents right now? So that we get put in perspective as to what we're looking at.
So through you, your worship, to the councillor, currently within the study area, there are 0 residents. It is fully an employment area. And from the 2019 Region of Halton Employment Survey, the current number of jobs are 3,124. So
Wow.
in terms of the net new jobs being produced through the concept, if you're using the 2051 marker, net new jobs would be 15,475.
Wow. Okay, that really helps put it in perspective. The only other thing I'd like to add, and I appreciate, it is a forecast, I realize, but also when you talk about bike lanes, I would suggest separated bike lanes. Like this is, I think they're safer. I hope that's what we're looking at going forward. Similar to what you see in the European countries like Sweden and everything. They do a pretty good job there. So anyway, thank you for the presentation. I think we're a long ways off 2051 right now. So we'll just one step at a time. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with you, Mr. Mayor, and with Councillor Elgar in terms of ATMP and bike lanes. When I hear transportation failure, and that is already including, I assume, the move to 6 lanes plus a turning lane from 4 that's there currently. I believe we'll have connectivity to the west through the Wycroft extension. I look forward to perhaps at the meeting on the 22nd, connectivity to the east over 16 Mile Creek. It's great getting them to the creek, but we need to get them over in some way. The question regarding the MTSA, it talks about 500 to 800 meters. What are the parameters on that from the province? Who drives that radius? Is it based on geographic hard stops? Is it based on once we get the population there? What are our parameters on that?
So through you, your worship, to the councillor. So major transit station areas are actually a defined term in the provincial growth plan, and it specifically calls out the 500 to 800 meter radius. And it is premised on walking distances of approximately 5 minutes to 10 minutes walk. And that is used as kind of a metric for, how far someone might be willing to walk from their home to get to the GO station, for example. So it is, it's all premised on walkability and creating that walkable neighborhood. In terms of where those boundaries are actually drawn, that was part of the process that we worked with Halton Region to determine. So obviously within this study area, there are some pretty easy boundaries. So the QEW obviously is quite a significant piece of infrastructure that creates boundaries. The 14-mile creek to the east was a natural feature which created kind of a natural boundary to follow. To the south was the established residential neighborhood, which determined that boundary. And then the boundary to the west, sorry, I think I said west before. Anyway, the boundary to the west along the existing industrial properties, the 800 meter radius was used as the cutoff line there. So that's where it comes from, is the growth plan. It is a defined term, and it's premised on creating walkable neighborhoods where people will be more likely to walk to take transit.
So we do have flexibility in between the 500 to 800, depending on the geography and the attributes of the area.
Correct. Yeah. The general guidance is that the MTSA boundaries should be delineated to maximize the number of transit users. So they do encourage you to try to create it as big as possible, but of course there are natural barriers or existing highway corridors and things that create those natural breaking points where you wouldn't carry a boundary over there just because it's about the premise is walkability. So you're not going to walk across the highway necessarily. So.
I appreciate that. In terms of air quality, you talked about the current conditions. How does and the need for a buffer? How does the Queen Elizabeth factor into that in terms of the emissions from the highway?
Through you, your worship, to the councillor. I don't know if it's possible to open up the slide again, but there is an image on the air quality buffer slide that shows it is on, I believe it's slide 18, but if you go up a few more, right there, it shows the area within the dashed line that the QEW has the air quality impact. There is a difference which we can pull between what can go within the dashed lines and then what can be built within the yellow lines, but no residential uses can go within either of those. But the QEW does not play a significant impact in terms of sensitive uses that can be introduced. It's more existing industrial operations.
Thank you very much.
All righty, who's next? Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. So my questions are around realizing a vision. And I'm not sure if it's Brad or our consultant that can speak to it, but one of my concerns is that a couple of times the comments have been made, well, there's no regulatory policy. It's purely a direction around urban design. And I think all of us, take a lot of pride in how the town, how the town evolves, and that evolution around open space and public realm and walkability. they really do speak to the livability. And as it happens, my background today is downtown Oakville, and those big wide sidewalks that make people feel, they're out and they're connected. Even within a residential community, one of my concerns is, are we going to create that sense of openness in the public realm? And how are we going to ensure through a regulatory approach, if that's what's required, that that's what we actually achieve, that we're not having development butting up so close to the road network, that we're not, that we are addressing something that is truly livable.
So through you, your worship, to the councillor, I completely agree with you. And I think that there are opportunities when we craft the draft official plan amendment that we can write some of those items into policy. Generally, what we'll see is that we're looking at potentially having an urban design schedule attached as part of the policy framework. It's similar to what we've introduced in some of our Main Street growth areas for Kerr, Bronte, and downtown. We're identifying streets where we want the enhanced streetscape treatments, which may be provided through enhanced setbacks in the built form, which create that pleasant experience as a pedestrian that you want to achieve. So some of those things are achieved through the policies. Some of those things can be guided through our urban design standards. And some of those things might be also achieved through our implementing zoning, which will come later. But in terms of, the actual measurement of setbacks from a property line, for example. So there's a number of ways to get at this. And I fully appreciate that is very important because, if we're trying to create a walkable, bikeable, pleasant environment, you're going to want these spaces to feel safe and comfortable when you're using them. Otherwise, people will not use them. So there are ways to tackle this. And I hope that we can address some of those items in the draft official plan amendment to come.
Thank you, Brad. And my only other question that builds off that is, and I appreciate it wasn't really an architectural rendering what we saw, but when you looked at sort of how the heights would be, you do get a sense of, I see the towers, which are, necessary density and appropriately near, it seems, where they're located. But I'm a little concerned about mid-rise and the variation in height, because if you look at really well-designed communities, that variation occurs. You don't see everything at 8 stories or 8 and then 4 or 5 at 20. You do see a variety. Is that something we can put in the regulatory framework as well? So we're not constantly battling with somebody, I'm allowed 8, they're going to ask for 10. So is there anything we can do as we formalize what the vision is to limit and create what you really want in terms of heights, not just what gets negotiated out?
So through you, your worship, to the councillor. So the height schedule that was presented as part of the ASP, or the area specific plan, does provide for a range within those height areas. So for example, the mid-rise section, I believe is a range between 3 stories and 8 stories. So from an official plan perspective, that might be where you stop in terms of providing that direction. And then it might get picked up in the urban design standards, where we continually encourage a variation in building heights along the streetscape. And those are the types of things where, we might not be able to mandate that, site A is 3 stories and the site right next to it is 5 stories, and to that level of detail. But from a high level perspective, I think more appropriate for an official plan is that you build in that flexibility and you build in that potential to enable these different conditions to take place. So I think it's there in terms of that variable height. It's just a matter of, as privately initiated development applications come forward, again, it's a perpetual problem where you say one thing and they ask for something else, then there's negotiation. That is part of the planning framework in Ontario somewhat. But we do try to obviously consider that and provide for a good range within our framework that is appropriate and is supportable from a transportation perspective, supportable from a design perspective. So I hope that addresses your question.
Perhaps I can add through you, Your Worship, to the councillor. I will add too that the demonstration plan it's strictly a visual of one way that the recommendations in the report could build out. What actually gets built will obviously look different. And I do agree with you that you want variation throughout the built form and the cityscape. But I also like to think of it as some of the great cities I can think of have iconic buildings and taller buildings at certain points. But if you think of a city like Paris or a city like Vienna, there is a lot of benefit to a mid-rise form throughout the majority of it, and then certain areas where you have more of that variation in terms of scale and height as well too.
Thank you for that, and I would agree. But it's the variation in the mid-rise form that I'm actually looking for, because the iconic towers is a given, and we're going to have it. But variation in mid-rise, and given the mindset of some developers, if you say 8, they're going to 8 and asking for 10. And I just was wondering if there was options around that. But I do thank you for hearing my questions and your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Any other questions? Councillor Chisholm.
Thanks, Brad and Dave, for the presentation. It is exciting, and it looks very promising to wait to 2051. I hope I'm still on this earth to see that happen. Going forward, where are we making this presentation or keeping Metrolinx informed of what this development process is, so they're in parallel with this?
Through you, Your Worship, to the councillor. Yep, the Metrolinx staff, as part of their transit-oriented communities division or group, have been involved in our technical advisory committee all the way along. They've been providing commentary as part of this study process, so they know what we're doing. And likewise, we've been commenting on their updates to some of their work as this has been going along as well. So I think we do have a relationship there in terms of the expectations that we have going forward for our area specific plan, and they're fully aware of that. In terms of what will get built when, some of these items will come through Metrolinx when they have funding to do so.
So, Brad, with respect to this future development in this area, are we at the mercy of Metrolinx with respect to them doing their work prior, or we're running simultaneously? How's that working out on a schedule with respect to future development and with Metrolinx?
Through you, Your Worship, to the councillor. I'm not fully up to speed, I admit, on a lot of the work in terms of timeframes for Metrolinx. I think a lot of their timeframes keep shifting as well. I do know that the GO line is meant to be electrified within the next, I think, 5 years or so. That is the goal of theirs, and to have the all-day two-way rail service at higher frequencies. So that's closer to the near term. They were just recently chatting about their station access plan and updating those plans to understand, how people are accessing the station, where parking might go in future. Obviously, with this particular plan, the GO station parking will have to be, rethought and reimagined as part of future development on their sites. And that might be part of a parking structure, be it underground parking or structured parking with additional uses on top. I would say that, as part of future development, if they do choose to have an above grade parking structure, we would definitely want to see active at-grade uses integrated into the streetscape and not just have a parking structure. We'd want to see something more out of that. So those are the ideas that we still have and will be integrated into our plan. Yes. So.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you. Councillor O'Meara, you're back.
Your worship, just happy to move receipt at the appropriate time here, the staff's recommendations.
Thank you. I'll come back to you for that. But first, we have a registered delegation, Emma West from Bousfields, and she's written you a letter. I think you all have it. She's raised 5 or 6 interesting points. Ms. West, are you prepared to join us? Did you want to speak to your letter or anything else? There she is.
Good evening. I'm Emma West, a partner at Bousfields. Thank you very much to council and staff for the opportunity to speak on this matter this evening. I am working with Northbridge Investment Management. They have the property at 2172 Wycroft Road, which is directly west of the north parking lot of the existing GO station. So we've been monitoring this process with them as it's progressed, and we are generally pleased with the direction that the process is taking. We just had some questions and points of clarification to address with you this evening. Those are covered in the letter that you will have been provided with, and some of it relates to the discussion that has already been had amongst yourselves this evening. So just a few points. In some of the figures where there was massing and building footprints shown, the legend in those figures showed some of the buildings on the Northbridge site, so directly west of the GO station lands. The label was shown as employment commercial, whereas in some of the other schedules, it's shown as a mixed use area, and in particular, urban core. Also, I had a question with respect to the phasing. In the report, there are some sections that deal with different densities that would be provided for on all of the lands within the MTSA, and those evolve from 2031 to 2041 to 2051. They change over time, increasing in density. And when I look at that, I don't understand the connection between the phase 1 and phase 2 that was described in the presentation earlier in terms of how the lands will build out as a mixed use area, predominantly mixed use in that phase 2 period. I wasn't sure of the connection between how the densities were planned to change over those 10-year time periods versus the phase 1 and 2. And I appreciate that pinning down the timing of the phase 2 development is tied to relocation of some of the key industries in the area, and so you can't have a specific timeline for that. But I was curious about those other projections for 2031, 2041, and 2051. And then my next point relates to some of what's already been discussed today in terms of the built form types that would be permitted. So Northbridge's lands, as I said, are directly abutting the north parking lot. Their lands are shown with low mid-rise, so the 3 to 8 stories. And we would like to request, and we had outlined this in a letter when the initial concepts were provided back in 2019. We would like to request that their lands, or at least the eastern portion of their lands, be identified for the high mid-rise to built form type so that tall buildings could be permitted. And in part, these lands would likely or possibly be ready to develop in advance of the Metrolinx lands, and therefore would be the closest mixed-use lands to the station area. The closest point of the Northbridge lands is about 100 meters, and the furthest point is about 300 meters from the station platform. So it would contribute to the complete community, the walkability, and the density within the area. Further to that, you will have seen on one of the figures that was shown earlier that a community center or community use is proposed either on the Northbridge lands at the southern portion of their site, closest to the station area, or on the lands to the west of theirs. But if it is going to be a community center integrated into the base of a residential or mixed use building, that would work better within a podium tower footprint than a mid-rise building. The footprint of the mid-rise building would be quite different than a tower podium form. And so if there was going to be a community facility, that would be better accommodated within that tall building form. We also wanted to understand a little bit more about whether or not that was going to be a requirement in the plan or is just a recommendation. And then my final point relates to the road network. The proposed road K runs north-south between the north parking lot area that would develop as mixed use and the North Bridge site. And then there's road B, which is an east-west road that runs through that central portion between Wycroft and the railway corridor, and then there's road C to the south of that. We wondered if the policies, although right now the recommendations for the policies say that the precise locations of the roads will be determined through future study, but we wondered if the need for all of those roads would be determined through future study, because there seems to be a lot of east-west connection through there, and we weren't certain that all of that would be required. So those are my comments. Again, it's a very detailed report. There's obviously been a lot of work done by the consulting team and staff, and so we appreciate the opportunity to provide just a few comments on all of the work that's been done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. West. It's always good to have comment from a firm as august as Bosfield. So it's good to have you here. Councillor O'Meara has moved the staff recommendation, which is essentially receipt and development of a draft. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, the motion carries. Council, the next item, item number 9, is a notice of intention to designate Featherstone Parquet at 307 Ironside Drive. And Diane Childs is available for questions if you have any. And if you haven't any, the motion is to just issue a notice of the intent to designate the Featherstone Parquet. What's your pleasure, Council? Councillor Duddick.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd be pleased to move this along with items 10 and 11, which are also heritage related. But I would like to say that I congratulate both our parks and our heritage staff for the construction of this particular structure. They really did a good job of reintroducing a lot of the original items and giving it the presence that it deserves. So well done.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I actually just wanted to thank staff as well. Featherstone Parquet is a beautifully designed parquet, and our community, our residents use it quite a bit, especially the shade structure that the report speaks to. And I'm glad to see that we're taking the right steps to preserve hints of heritage in our community as our town continues to grow. So thank you for staff on your work on this.
Thank you very much, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you. Since this is an omnibus motion and includes item number 10, I want to take a moment to comment on the Bowbeer House. This was quite a arm twist years ago to get this particular developer to take care of this very important structure in North Oakville. And when they finally came on board and embraced it and lovingly stored this building inside a couple of storage facilities, I was skeptical as to whether or not this was really an appropriate treatment and whether it was going to work out in the end. I am blown away by the quality of this building and the significance that this building is going to have in North Oakville. It is truly an example of how restoration can really enhance a community. And we have a couple of these in North Oakville now. Sadly, not in my ward anymore. They're now in Councillor Sandhu and Parmar's ward, but this one, and there's I think at least 2 others up there, and there's one in Ward 6 as well. So congratulations to everybody, to our heritage planners, to our planning staff who really held everybody's feet to the fire, and of course the developer that actually agreed and did such a loving restoration. So congratulations to everybody, and thank you for this report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Knoll. I'm sure you speak for all of us on that note. Is there any objection to the motion by Councillor Duddeck? Madam Clerk, there being none, Councillor's motion carries. Could I have a motion to rise and report to Council? Councillor Knoll, thank you. Any objection? There being none, that motion carries. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and has made recommendations on consent items 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and confidential consent item C1, public hearing item 6, discussion items 7, 8, 9, and 10, and advisory committee minutes item 11, as noted by the clerk. It would be in order now for a mover and seconder for my report. Councillor Grant and Councillor Robertson, thank you very much. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The motion is carried. That brings us to new business of an emergency, congratulatory, or condolence nature. And I thought I might lead off by giving a few remarks. It is International Women's Day. It's Women's History Month. Let's hope that all of us working together can see a time when everyone can reach their potential without sexism or other prejudice or bias. Today, we can get tickets to the Undinner Party and hear inspired, inspirational speakers, and add the names of remarkable women to the Wall of Honor. We can send one of Zonta's I Celebrate You cards at the display in Town Square. We can sign up for the Women Who Inspire virtual event this Thursday that Councillor Pavan Palmer and I sponsor each year, and we would welcome you there. And so thank you very much for the opportunity to give those remarks. Anyone else with something for this section? All right then. How about a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws? Councillor Giddings and Councillor Elger, thank you very much. Is there any objection to the bylaws as printed in the agenda? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The bylaws are carried. And I want to thank everybody for your time and attention and tell you what a great pleasure it has been to work with you tonight. And I look forward to our next meeting, and this meeting is now over. Thank you.